Right, so to little surprise at all, a new Labour minister has turned up in Israel already, and to even less of a surprise, it's the new Foreign Secretary and no stranger to pro-Zionist donations himself, David Lammy. Well, we've had Labour figures doing the media rounds saying stuff like, "We do not condone all forms of political violence following the apparent attempted assassination of Donald Trump." Here's Lammy pressing the flesh with the likes of Israeli Prime Minister / genocidal maniac Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's President Isaac Herzog, as if somehow this statement does not apply to them, that they're exempt, that Israel is held to a different set of values to everybody else. Well, they aren't, and I'm frankly sick and tired of this nonsense line of thinking that keeps coming up, which Israel will lap up all day long. And if you thought Labour might have held Israel to account more following claims, as it made during the general election campaign and in their manifesto, to recognise a state of Palestine, this should show they absolutely won't. They're just prepared to be more dishonest and more hypocritical about it than even the Tories were.
As a prominent politician here, what do you think when you see something like that happening anywhere in the world?
Horrified and angry that our politics has been allowed to descend to that level. The Prime Minister spoke to President Trump last night as we arrived in Berlin to convey not only his sympathies but also his horror at what had happened, and to condemn that violence and to convey his sympathies to the victims of that attack as well. It's been heartening to see many world leaders come out and stand against what happened in America yesterday, but it is part of a wider toxicity of politics. We've just been through the general election here in the UK. It is the most toxic election that I can ever remember participating in, and I think what we need is real leadership across the political spectrum, but you can rest assured that you'll find that from this government, that we will condemn violence wherever it is found. Keir Starmer has been clear that his government will uphold the highest standards, not just in what we do in politics, but in how we conduct ourselves as well. And the new cabinet very much intends that we're going to have a reset moment in politics where we have far less heat, far more light, where we can disagree agreeably, and we can set a better tone for the political debate that we have out in the country.
Right, so that there was a clip of Lisa Nandy, Labour's Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, discussing the aftermath of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, who is apparently the President of the US, according to Nandy there. A slip of the forked tongue, I'm sure. Yet another politician, another interview, however, discussing what happened in the US over the weekend at that Trump rally in Pennsylvania. Starmer has been on the phone to Trump already, apparently, and Nandy was heartened to see so many world leaders coming out to express their sympathy with Trump. She condemned the toxicity in this general election campaign as well, in the same breath, which was one of several media swipes she personally had taken at MPs and their alleged campaigns. We saw some of her best mates in the Labour Party lose their seats or come very close to it. Other examples she'd named in another interview, notably being Jonathan Ashworth and Jess Phillips. The ire created amongst Muslim communities, as both those MPs represent large numbers of, as well as others disgusted by Labour's stance on the matter of Palestine and Gaza, and Ashworth notably sharing Keir Starmer's narrative of attacking Bengali citizens here in the UK. Well, Ashworth lost his seat and deserved it too. Phillips nearly did, and the sense of entitlement over that, and others as well, was palpable. "How dare you people vote me out?" has been very much the impression Ashworth and a few others have given. Phillips made a prat of herself, shouting at people during her acceptance speech, and curtsied to those assembled just to wind them up, basically rubbing their nose in the fact they didn't manage to get her out, but they came pretty close. Another Labour loser, Khalid Mahmood, even wants a police investigation into how he lost his seat. It's pathetic. In the middle of a Labour landslide, you lost your seats. That's a reflection on you. So reflect on it. But then Nandy, who probably owes her slightly increased majority this time around to Reform UK splitting the Tory vote, though still way down on previous results in previous elections that she's had, came to say that this Labour government will condemn violence wherever it is found. Unless that happens to be Israel, though, clearly. David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, if what Nandy said was true, which of course it isn't, wouldn't be in Israel if they meant it. A nation committing abject genocide. A nation against whom accusations of a plausible case of genocide have been made against. That have killed 38,000 innocent people, 20,000 of them children. And he's there shaking Benjamin Netanyahu's hand as if it is the proudest moment of his life, though given his posture, he might just be trying to hold a fart in. Netanyahu, for his part, as per usual, looks like the cat that got the cream. The UK is in safe hands in Israel's interests. The only reason Lammy, as a representative of this country, which is a signatory to the Rome Statute, and the founding principles the International Criminal Court is of course built upon, would have to go to Israel, frankly, in any reasonable sense, would be to deliver the arrest warrants on behalf of the ICC that this country is currently holding up, because inexplicably this Labour government, now having been in power for getting on for 2 weeks, hasn't withdrawn that yet, and I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. Lammy, for his part, though, should have his suitability for this post questioned for doing this, posing for a photo op with a war criminal, but equally because he posted a tweet very much in line with Lisa Nandy's statement about political violence, and he did so literally from Israel. The UK government condemns all forms of political violence in the strongest terms. As we monitor the shocking developments in Pennsylvania, our thoughts and best wishes are with President Trump, along with every victim and their families. You're shaking hands with a war criminal, committing genocide and blocking every single attempt at peace there is by changing the remit of Israeli negotiators or leaking confidential information to the media to undermine such steps every step of the way, and has been doing so for the last 6 months. And from that country, that nation, meeting that government responsible for such atrocity, you claim to oppose all forms of political violence in the strongest possible terms? You utter Burke. This is a conflict between the government of Israel and Hamas, the government of Gaza. This is the epitome of political violence, therefore, you absolute balloon of a man. If you meant a word of that, you wouldn't have met Netanyahu. You wouldn't have shaken his hand. You wouldn't have met Herzog, the most famous picture in the world of whom was him signing missiles, and who said there is no such thing as an innocent Palestinian, and not even the children. If you meant a word of this, you wouldn't be in Israel unless you were delivering that arrest warrant, unless you wanted to go there and look Netanyahu in the eye as you say, we're going to bring sanctions to bear on you for your war crimes. We're going to sanction you and not trade with you anymore. We're going to enact a full arms embargo and military aid embargo, and if you set foot in any one of our territories, we're going to arrest you and deliver you personally to The Hague. He should have also made clear that funding to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, to whom UK still finds itself withholding the funding for, will be reinstating. After all, Lammy himself demanded this himself back in April. So I can't imagine why he still hasn't restored it, though perhaps actions speak louder than words, as this photo op perhaps demonstrates. That's the only reason Lammy should have for going there. How is this upholding the rules-based order? How is this taking a strong stance against political violence? You might as well have been photographed with Putin, for that is exactly how this should be viewed. At the same time Trump was shot at, Israel killed 92 Gazans in al-Mawasi. That should have, bare minimum, prompted cancellation of this visit. But no. The reality is it's entirely in keeping with the pro-Zionist position of the Labour Party, entirely in keeping with Lammy as a Labour friend of Israel, and entirely in keeping with Lammy as an MP who has received tens of thousands of pounds in donations from pro-Israel and Zionist sources to continue with this Middle East jolly regardless. It's not like Lammy can possibly be ignorant to it, though he has, of course, maintained silence on that matter whilst in Israel, the matter of that massacre. Today, for example, though, he's been hugging families of those whose loved ones are held by Hamas and demanding hostages be released. But how about the families of those currently held by Israel? But prior to his Israel visit, he was quite happy to tweet out condemnation of a strike near a Gazan school. The reports of civilian casualties following an Israeli strike near a school in Abasan in Gaza are appalling. The devastating violence in Gaza has gone on far too long, and we want to see urgent measures to protect civilians, an immediate ceasefire and the release of all hostages. Again, he ends it, though, by making demands not of both sides to come together, not of both sides to release hostages, as Israel holds far more than Hamas do, just of Hamas. He should examine Netanyahu's conduct in all of this too, how he has been instrumental in wrecking every negotiation going. Perhaps pick up a copy of Haaretz whilst you're there, Dave, and educate yourself a bit. And as I was writing this, a new article dropped. I said I was going to come back to this point in a moment. Subsequent to Lammy's flesh-pressing and schmoozing, it has now been formally announced that Labour are performing a U-turn on withdrawing that legal challenge the Tories mounted on the International Criminal Court. They're going to carry on trying to get Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the Israeli Defence Minister, off the hook for charges of war crimes. As Israeli newspaper Mariv has reported that David Lammy has now given Israel assurances they would continue to see it through. Both in words and deeds, David Lammy lacks sincerity, a message followed up on by many others now in government. The issue of UNRWA funding and arms sales to Israel is now fully on Labour and continuing completely where the Tories left off. Well, good luck in justifying that. So much for all the talk of change under Labour, eh? Told you they were the Tory B team. I'm not being proven wrong, am I? Meanwhile, here's a story covering the Israeli media turning on Netanyahu over his prevention of a peace deal, ceasefire being reached, his country's own media turning on him over it. This ought to send alarm bells to those who would engage in diplomatic visits, though in Lammy's case clearly not. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.